Good afternoon, everyone. It's 4 o'clock on October 26th. We're convening the meeting for the Charter and Review Committee in accordance with the rules of the state of Delaware. We'll first start with a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with justice for all.
Okay. With that, we'll do a roll call. So I'm here at the Life Saving Station, joined with Jimmy O'Connor.
Jimmy O'Connor, present.
Thank you. Elaine, via Zoom. Elaine, present.
Elaine, you're on mute.
There we go. All right. And Dan Malley?
Present.
Okay. So we were also expecting Marcia Scheck, but she's was dialing in. So if she joins, we'll add her to it. But we have a quorum, so we can go ahead and proceed. Let's go through town officials. I see on Zoom Jim Dedes and Dawn Hanks and
Yes.
town solicitor Fred Townsend and
Right.
Commissioner Persinger.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I've covered everybody. All right, so the first is I would like to go ahead and adopt today's agenda, if I could. So could I get a motion to adopt today's agenda?
A motion to adopt.
Okay, Elaine, Jimmy, and all in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, we'll call that unanimous. And next on the agenda is to approve the minutes of October 23rd, 2023. Anybody have any comments, any discussion points from those minutes? No? Okay. Then I'll ask for a motion to approve them.
Motion to approve.
All right, we're gonna call it Jimmy motion and Elaine seconded. Okay. With that, we can go ahead and open the public meeting. I'll ask if there are any comments from anyone from the public. Okay. Anything any of the committee members would like to bring up or discuss at this time? Otherwise, we'll move into the first agenda item. Anything members would like to bring up or discuss at this time? Otherwise, we'll move into the first agenda item. Okay. So what we wanted to do is there were several items to discuss today. The first was item number 1, which had 4 items that Commissioner Persinger had mentioned to us during the last meeting that we wanted to review and perhaps come up with some discussion. And if we can make recommendations to the commissioners through this meeting, we want to go ahead and do that. So the first item on the agenda is section 5. Which was qualifications of the mayor and town commissioners. I'll go ahead and just read it quickly. It's section B that was in question, which indicates at all times, no less than 2 sitting commissioners must qualify as resident town commissioners. A resident town commissioner is a bona fide resident and a domiciliary, of the town. So the question that was raised is, if an election has only 1 resident candidate and 1 open resident council position, is the appointment automatic? Anyone want to discuss that? Bring up a point? I see Marcia's joined us. Hi, Marcia.
Hi, everybody.
So I guess the point that it's not changing that there'd be two resident commissioners and the mayor would need to be a resident. It's if you don't have that, what would the process be to get a commissioner? For instance, if you needed another, there was a fair election and 2 non-residents won, but we like next year we'll need we'll need a resident besides just Gary if he runs. So if Bill doesn't run, we'll need a resident. And if no resident wins, we would have to appoint a resident according to our code. And that's what the question is. And at this point, we've never had to do that. And I would say that if you're looking at this and the qualifications of the mayor, and then also bringing up the issue of whether or not LLCs are to be allowed to vote, is that also going to be discussed, Dave?
So Elaine, we didn't make that on the agenda tonight. So
Okay, good.
Since we didn't get it on the agenda, we're going to pass on it for this discussion. We'll add it to the agenda for the next meeting. So we'll just stay focused on this one item for now. And I think you've actually done a pretty good job at qualifying it for everybody.
Well, what I would say to you is that I think that you need to pass on these issues as well, because if you do end up taking, and I would recommend a referendum if it was something that you changed the LLCs, but if you did change where LLCs could vote, the composition of having two residents both on the commissioner, both as commissioners and as a mayor would become more important. So you can't separate the two issues. So I would say that you do nothing now except for that you get to a point that you will appoint someone if a resident, if you do not have a resident in the next election. So that's the only thing I could recommend. And is that not in the code already? I thought we could do that. You're saying it's not.
Well, this is Gary. I think it is. I mean, the other issue is if you have a resident and two non-residents run for two positions, one of which has to be a resident, then the resident automatically wins.
Right.
Even if the other two candidates outpoll the resident.
Yeah.
So is there interest, need, desire to change that situation? That I think is the basic question.
Well, I think that you can't separate the other question if they are going to pursue the LLC, because it's really important that this comes as a set before you make any other changes. So I would stay with the status quo, and it is keeping that the mayor needs to be a resident and the two commissioners need to be residents. And if Bill doesn't run and we have to recruit a resident to run, then we have to recruit a resident to run. So I think that you stay where it is right now, unless you're doing it as a package, or if you're going to put the other thing aside, then I still think you don't even address this issue at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Elaine. Anyone else have a comment?
That's a stupid thing.
No. Marcia, any comment there? No.
I mean, I know it wasn't on the agenda. My thought is that, we're a tiny town. We're 2 blocks by 20 blocks. And, we have to work within that. And if this turns out that this isn't necessarily working, I think we just need to not look so much at the procedural issues of hierarchy of who's a resident and who's not. There are an awful lot of people who don't use Dewey as their domicile, but are here more than residents. And last time I looked, we only have about 300 residents. And I don't necessarily feel like if 3 people run and 2 are non-residents and one's a resident and the resident loses, but he automatically wins because of a criteria we have, that's not necessarily representative of what the people want. And I think elections are based on who the people want representing them. So when you have 2 non-residents that win and you say, well, you can't win, and these 2 non-residents got, let's just hypothetically say 1,000 votes apiece, and the non-resident got 100, and we're going to make the non-resident our representative. I don't know. It doesn't really sit right with me in terms of what is the culture and the basis for electorals and elections. It's to
So if we kept the way it
represent the
is,
people.
I want to respectfully say that it's a complicated issue and emotional issue, and this isn't depriving. We might have 300 residents, but we have about 1,900 voters, and we get about 700 to 800 people voting, which is good compared to many municipalities. So the people are actively voting and they can vote. They can vote if they're on a lease. They can vote, even business owners, if they have a lease, a 15, I think it's 5 years, or they've signed a 15-year lease. So we have given a lot of access to voting. It's the question of whether or not you let LLCs, which is not on the agenda, and so I don't want to get into the particulars about it, but I will say you need to have these two issues with the LLC issue workshopped, then discussed at council meetings, and then I would say a referendum if you're going to go in that direction. And then you look at these other two issues, because I thought we were going to be discussing this because I thought it was on the agenda. So I had a sleepless night yesterday discussing or with people the possible issues, and the issues would be quite big if we ended up having all of these things happen at the same time, letting anybody vote that they want. I mean, we already have criteria. We can't rewrite the voting rules that if you come down for the summer, you get to vote for the town. It's if you live there, if you have a deed, if you have a long-term lease. So I just would respectfully ask people to do this in a way that was organized, and that means all of the issues together.
Jimmy, you wanted to say?
I would say the scenario would never happen where you would have one resident and two non-residents in an election. It's not possible. There would just be no election. Right?
Right. If you had one resident position open, it would be the resident.
You mean that if there's only two positions open, if Gary runs and Bill runs, everything's, and it's always worked out well that we haven't had that run into this position. People have resigned. As David Jasinski filled a seat, then ran, but there'd be no election next year. But if they were unopposed, because you'd be filling the requirements, and they were unopposed. If there is someone that runs against the scenario being that Gary gets the most votes, and say Elaine Bowl gets the most votes, and Elaine would have to decide she wants to live in, or Gary would have to decide if they wanted to live in Dewey, or we'd have to appoint a resident to actually the commission, to be a commissioner. That's how it would work. But it hasn't happened. It could happen, and I think that's the reason people are just bringing it up, since we're going over the.
Okay. Thank you, Elaine. James, did you have anything you want to follow up on? No. Okay.
Could I follow up?
Go ahead, Fred.
So I think Ms. Scheck identified the issue that's on the agenda, which is, and I'm not here to express an opinion, but the question is whether you want to maintain your residency representation on council, whether you want to have minimally 2 or minimally 1 or none. I think that's a legitimate question that can be considered outside of the question of LLCs or anything else. So I think that's an appropriate discussion item. We do know that if you've got one under the current charter provision, if you have one vacancy that is for a resident, it's got to be filled by a resident, and unless two residents file, then you're not going to have an election for that seat. But you're virtually always going to have a vacancy also in the non-resident position that could be filled, and you could have an election there. So to me, it's more a question of, do you want to maintain the current requirement that at least 2 resident candidates serve at any given time?
And I think, just for clarity on that, I do think that's a separate issue and doesn't have to be taken in the context of LLCs. That's very complicated and another issue of how we control those. But I think there could be a situation where there are 2 seats open and 2 non-residents run and 1 resident runs, and the 2 non-residents get the most votes. And what I'm saying is, I think we need to consider it, because if there was that situation and you have two seats, one's a resident seat and one's a non-resident, and two non-residents are running for one non-resident seat, and one resident is running for a resident seat, and what happens if the two non-residents get, let's wildly say, 1,000 votes apiece, and the resident gets 100? It's clear the people want to be represented by the two people that got 1,000. So, you know, in the process of what an election is for, the purpose to be represented by someone you want representing you, I think it's a difficult thing to say, well, yes, these two non-residents got 1,000 votes apiece and the resident got 100, meaning the populace really doesn't want the resident in office or to represent them, but we are going to say that we are going to take out one of the non-residents and we are going to assign that position to the person that got 100 votes. I don't think that's really the spirit and the nature of what elections are about. And I think
All right. So let me give you the nightmare scenario that I think
Oh,
that.
wait, Elaine, I'm going to stop you just for a minute because we've got David Moskowitz, who's been on for public comment. I want to give David a chance to speak here. David?
Yeah, hello.
Yep, you're on,
Yeah,
David.
I think the solicitor misconstrued the issue because it could go the other way as well. You could require 3 residents to be on council. And I give you this example because there's 5 council members. And right now, Dewey just requires 2 of 5, which is 40%. But if you look at Rehoboth and Bethany, it's actually the other way. It's a majority are residents. And more residents are living here than ever, more full-time residents. So the fact that someone says you won't find residents, that's not true. And that's not true in 2023, 2024, where you have more full-time residents than ever. And I mean, think about it. You're having 40% of the residents, 40% of the council represented by people who live here full-time. But the other thing is, it's giving you a choice for mayor. So when they vote, the mayor's not elected in Dewey. It's one of the council members. And should something happen to that mayor, you need a mayor living here full-time, you get 2 choices. And the mayor has shifted during times where it went from Diane Hansen to Dale Cook. So you really need that 2 resident spot. But the question should not be, should you go down to 1 resident spot or 0? Because then you're disfranchising someone like me who lives here full-time. And what you may pass, the commissioners may pass, the state will not pass. The question should be, should you go down, should you go up, which the solicitor left out, to 3 full-time, 3 residents required as part of the council to be similar to Bethany and Rehoboth. And the other thing is, people who don't live here but own property are given a vote where in other municipalities they may not. But at the same time, you need to live here to be an active commissioner and a mayor. Like, it's like people think they can just like be here on a weekend and run the town. That doesn't work as a commissioner. People knock on your door all days and nights. So I'm just saying you should be looking the other way, and it should be 3 resident commissioners.
Thank you, David. I'll just weigh in on this. I'm kind of for maintaining the status quo personally. I do think it's important to have residents part of the town commissioners. So I'm in favor of not making any change. And if there was an issue, then appointing someone to fill the spot. So I do hear everyone else saying, the right of the people or what people speak in elections should be considered. But if we're going to make that change, and I think it needs to go something bigger to like a referendum or something like that. So
I agree.
so I think if you want to make that change, then it needs to go to a referendum. So,
and I agree on this subject. I think something like that is a referendum item. And I think a referendum is perfect for it because it will determine what the majority of the people want, not just us 5 or 6.
right.
So I think this is a great conversation for that, but I think a change like that would deserve a referendum, and respectfully, that's why we have them, because the people that own property in this town I think it's very hard to judge whether or how often you live here because there are many people who are domiciled there. You know, I'm not there 5, 6, 7 months a year often. That doesn't, but I could be a mayor. That doesn't necessarily meet what we're all trying to talk about. So, and I think another thing is we ought to determine how many, I guess town hall can tell us by the voter registration, how many full-time qualified residents do we have in Dewey Beach that have their driver's license in Dewey Beach, claim their taxes in Dewey Beach, and claim Dewey Beach as a domicile. So I think that's a first starting point. And then I think it is maybe a conversation for a workshop that would be highly publicized for people to attend and be online, and then possibly, if there were interest, to go to a referendum. I just don't think that's one thing that any committee or council should decide without input.
Okay.
Well, it sounds like you all agree with what I said.
Yeah.
That's
So I
what-
just-
It's a complicated issue, and I'm telling you that I could dazzle you with what ifs that if we went in that direction, especially if we went with the
So
LLC.
Elaine, I'm
So
going to interrupt you for a minute. I think we've kind of come to a conclusion on this. We got other items to cover tonight.
Okay,
Jimmy's got a hard stop at 5, so we want to get through some other items here to have a vote. I think we need to move on this. So I'm going to suggest right here to the group, and then I'll look for feedback. But it sounds to me like the consensus of the group is not to make any recommendation to the commissioners at this time on this topic, is to let it be as is.
I agree with that.
Okay, so I hear a yes from Jimmy. How about Elaine or Marcia? Is that
Yeah, I
basic?
agree.
Okay. All right. Elaine?
yes,
Okay. So Fred, do I actually need to make a motion not to do anything forward with this?
No, you
Okay.
do not.
Okay. All right. So with that, we'll move on to the next item, which is section 8, organization. I think the topic of this, and I'm hoping everybody's got it in front of them, is there is some redundancy with section 22 of the charter. And then the issue would be, what are the responsibilities of the council for approving a salary plan and monitoring compliance? And I'm going to try and summarize this if I can, but I think the way things currently work is that, and Commissioner Pershing, help me out here if I go awry, but the council approves the budget, and the town manager has the authority and the responsibility to manage to the budget. Is that correct? Or is that the intent that we want to get to?
Sorry. Dave, I think the intent on this is really a matter of redundancy, a question of redundancy rather. Since similar requirements and description here is included also in section 22 of the charter. That's part of it. I had to step away. I hope I'm not repeating something you said already.
No, you got it.
Okay. But then there's also an issue of the responsibility of the council in terms of it. Should we approve a salary plan and monitor compliance with the salary plan? How involved should the council be? What should the charter say about it?
Okay. So let me kind of frame this up for the group. Since we believe this is redundant to section 22, does anybody have an objection to making a recommendation to the commissioners that the redundancy be removed?
No.
No.
Any objections? Okay.
aren't you saying that we don't need both sections? We just need one section because the one section's redundant. So it's the second section that says everything that needs to be said. You don't need to say it twice.
Yes, I believe that's the case. I'm just not, what I'm not sure is I don't have section 26 in front of me that says, that details the responsibilities for managing the dollars, managing salary, managing to the plan.
Section 22.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me.
In the minutes it's in the documents.
Yes. Second.
So section 22 is, I mean, I can tell from a glance, it's quite a bit shorter. What I'm taking from what was proposed is that to the extent that we find language that's redundant in section 22, it be removed from section 22.
I think I believe, I think we're talking about the opposite, removing it from the earlier section.
Okay, that's fine. Either way.
Right.
Mhm.
Because section 2, it specifically addresses the town budget. And that leads into the second part of the question is what's the council's role in terms of the town budget? Obviously, we have to approve, but in terms of monitoring compliance, is the council's interest giving the manager an overall budget and expecting him or her to stay within it? Or should there be, some more fine-tuned monitoring and assessment of compliance with the budget? And in terms of also including salaries.
Right.
So should that be up to the town manager to, provide the salaries, the right salaries, as long as it stays within budget?
So along the same lines, the town manager has inquired as to whether or not it would be appropriate for the town manager to have the ability to hire additional employees as long as the hiring doesn't exceed the town's yearly budget.
Right. Right. So I believe I'll just point out in D, section D of section 22D, paragraph D, speaks to the town council shall, so far as possible, adhere to the town budget adopted under this section in making of appropriations and revising the schedules for fees, fines, penalties, and taxes due to the town. In addition, the town manager shall, so far as possible, ensure that the operations of each department and the town as a whole adhere to the town budget adopted under this section, and that all monies due to the town are collected in an effective and efficient manner. So you could add to that paragraph the inclusion of hiring staff as the town manager sees fit.
Within the budget.
Within the budget, right? I mean, we're giving him authorities, but we're also holding him accountable for the budget.
Mhm.
So I'm going to summarize and I'm going to ask for a motion for this, which is, can I get a motion from the group that we eliminate the redundancy of section 22 and that we augment section 22D to include the hiring, or that the town manager will manage to a budget including hiring? Is there any public comment? Is there any public comment on that?
Yes.
Go ahead, Dave. David, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, so that would actually set up the town for disaster, because having been a commissioner, it's very important, and this has worked for Dewey for almost 40 years. It's very important to have that salary plan and not just a number. So it says specifically the salaries or compensation of individual employees or officers must be consistent with the staffing plan approved as part of the annual budget process and are set by the appropriate department head with the approval of the town manager. Then with every year, the town manager presents the plan and the commissioners vote and approve it. If you just go by a number, the town manager could hire all these employees and then you can't just fire people. It doesn't work like that. The best practice in every town and every corporation is for the manager to bring to their manager a salary plan. That's how it always works in every good company in every good town. And for the town manager to just hire employees willy-nilly, the town could have a very bloated payroll. And then you also have pension expenses for certain employees. So, I mean, this would uproot the town and create a budget problem like no tomorrow. And what happens at the end of the year when the town manager just doesn't meet that number? It could lead to the disaster to the town. So the town is a very small town with only a small number of employees. There's no reason to give the town manager ability to give certain people raises. And if you remember, there's also been lawsuits against the town in the past, which I'm not sure everyone has been aware of or not. Sorry, got it. sorry, I got a call. There's been lawsuits against the town in the past, which you may or may not be aware of, from town manager treating people unequally. So by doing this budget publicly and having the commissioners vote on it, it keeps that out of the equation and makes everything fair. So, I mean, I'm just asking you not to change the process and keep things consistent, because things are working now. Why would you change the process and take out the say of the commissioners who are publicly elected, and that's how they get input? If you take out the publicly inputted public input, you're going to change the whole town.
Okay, thank you.
Dave, could I just check something? I think there are two issues here. The first issue is, should you combine sections, the relevant language from section 8 and section 22, and put it into section 22 so that you have just one section that deals with the requirements for the town budget and the responsibilities of the town manager. But then include whatever level of detail you think is necessary. It may be a combination of language from both section 8 and section 22 in terms of how finely detailed the town council's responsibility should be with respect to salaries and the staffing plan, and staying within that overall staffing plan and budget.
Okay, thank you. So with that, can I get a motion to combine section 8 and 22 to eliminate any redundancies? Let's vote on that. Let's vote on that. So can I get a motion to combine those and eliminate the redundancies?
Yes. Give
Okay.
one to Elaine.
And a second?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Jimmy. All in favor? And just a show of hands. Aye. Dan, everyone? Okay, so everyone's in favor of that. So we passed that one. On a second, let's go to the second topic, which is adding additional clarity for how the council approves the budget and to what level the town manager is held responsible. My suggestion is that we move this to the council to decide whether or not they want to, what granularity they want enabled to manage the town. And I mean, that's my suggestion, is to allow the council to decide, to give them the room to manage the town, whether they want to manage it to the dollars or to the people, but it's the council's decision to do that. Any
I
comments?
would not support that.
Elaine, you do support that?
I would not support that.
Okay. All right, so that's no. All right, so I don't have a first on that.
So are you asking whether, are you asking for a motion to change the current code, our current charter? Or are you just saying leave it the way it is?
Well, yeah, I was actually, Fred, trying to get to changing it. So it doesn't sound like there's any interest in changing it the way it's written.
Well, I thought you said you were interested in changing it to leave it to the commissioner's discretion, or making a motion not to make a recommendation to the commissioners. Perhaps I misunderstood you.
Right. So what I was trying to get to is, should we recommend that a change be made to the code to allow the council to approve the budget, give them the flexibility to manage to a budget, and the town manager to have the ability to manage to the budget, which would include some flexibility in staffing?
I see. Okay.
So that's what I'm looking for, a motion, and I'm not hearing a motion to proceed with that. Okay, so then with this, we'll leave things the way they are, and we have agreement on just the one, which is the redundancy of section 22 and section 8.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Let's move on to section 23, which is enumeration of powers. And Gary, I'm gonna ask, I believe the issue here is that we've got redundancy between section 26 and 23. And our suggestion is eliminate this section in A10 in section 23 in favor of section 26?
Yes, I think that's right.
Okay. So isn't there any discussion on that from the group?
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
Sure. There is currently redundancy in the town charter between section 23, paragraph A10, which speaks to the ability to borrow money. And it is also covered in section 26 of the charter. So the suggestion is to eliminate the redundancy in this section in A10 and section 23 and just have section 26 speak to the council's ability to borrow money.
Okay.
Okay? So can I get a first? Elaine, is that a first to?
That's a first.
Okay,
Yeah, second. I'll have a second.
thank you, Marcia. All right. All those in favor? Aye. 1, 2, 3.
Aye.
Dan, is that a yes, Dan?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So is it the intent to eliminate A10 from section 23?
Yes.
All right.
Or just the redundancy. I mean, it may be in section 23, since section 23 enumerates all of the powers of the town. Maybe just a statement that the town has the ability to borrow money within the constraints of section 26.
Mhm.
I mean, that's a possibility as well.
Mhm.
But I think that accomplishes the same thing. It's, the idea is to eliminate the redundant language and not treat things in both places where you don't need to.
Fred, does that provide enough clarity?
I think so.
Okay. So the last topic I think was in section 26.
Did you vote on that? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
we did.
All right. Thank you.
No problem. The last was in section 26, which speaks to the amount of money that can be borrowed. It is currently set at $3 million. And I believe the question is, do we want to increase that amount or give the commissioners a recommendation in terms of what that should be, or leave it to their discretion to increase? So I want to get some discussion on that topic.
Dave, just one point on that. When we did the charter review a couple of years ago, the proposal that came from this committee was that the limit be increased to $3.5 million. And in discussions at the council level, for whatever reason, we backed that down to 3 million. So that's just by way of background.
Right.
Was 3 million an increase over the then current?
It was. I think it was probably 1.5 million in the old charter.
So any comment from anyone on the committee?
I wouldn't know I wouldn't know the number, so I can't really be of help.
Commissioner Persinger, did you say it wasn't approved to go up to the 3.5 in the last discussion?
It was not approved. We backed it down to 3 million.
Is there, do you remember why?
I unfortunately do not know why. I think there's just, some reticence to put a number in there that's too low. I don't know if Bill Zolper has any thoughts about the prospects for needing to borrow money to build a new town hall. Any comments?
I think
Is
Bill's
Bill there?
Yeah,
Bill
Bill's
couldn't be with us.
No,
he
Bill's,
couldn't be with us.
no. Bill's concern really was focused on town hall, quite frankly. That's where it was at. And we're not sure what the ultimate cost is going to be. And Bill and I chatted about that this morning. And his concern is that should it go above whatever was approved by the council, that would there be sufficient funds should the council agree to borrow money? Would 3 million be enough, or should we increase it? But there was no figure that we discussed that would be a good figure, simply as that.
Okay.
Hey, Gary, when was that conversation about that considered 3.5 million, but settled on 3? How long ago was that?
This, probably at least 2 years ago, if not 3. I don't
Okay.
remember the specific dates.
Okay.
Anyone else have any comment?
Well, the question is if it is about the building fund, isn't that going to come up in front of the commissioners and they could they, is it possible to do a one-time assessment, not assessment, a one-time, more than $3 million? Is that a possibility, Gary?
Not with this language as it is now. We can't, in terms of indebtedness, we could not exceed $3 million.
If I were to make a recommendation to the group, it would be that we suggest to the commissioners that they want to consider increasing this debt ceiling if they feel it's appropriate, given the upcoming town expenses, without necessarily setting a number. Right? I mean,
Can you hold it just to the town building, the new building?
we could certainly, that we can make that any recommendation we want. I mean, if we want to say we believe that the commissioners can go ahead and borrow money up to support the new town hall, that is something we as a group can certainly recommend to the commissioners.
But hey, Dave, for me, I think it'd be good to have more context and more data before we just said yes to let's make the number higher. So if there are specifics around what the town hall is going to cost, and I think the town manager gave us a little bit of that in our meeting last month, but I without any more data, it'd be hard to say let's make a recommendation to just raise that number if they want to.
Okay.
And I think we're also, the last time I think I read somewhere, we're also getting some grants for the town hall.
I think that's right.
So
We are.
I think there's an in-kind grant and there's some kind of special loan from the state that's a low interest rate loan. So I agree. I think it's determining what they think a range of the town hall costs, what we have in grants, and whether we really need it.
I agree.
So does it sound, let me suggest this. Do we want to table this issue? Table this issue until we have more data for the next meeting?
Well, if you're going to be sending a suggestion, this is something they should be looking at. And perhaps that could be to send a suggestion that they need to examine this, because it's coming up, isn't it? Isn't in the next few years? So
The
they should
Elaine,
be talking about this.
we're not going to know. We were honestly not going to know what the actual cost of construction is going to be probably till April or May. Our projections are that the architect will finish everything that they need to do. GMB will finish their final assessment and have it ready to go out to bid. And we're not going to know till the bids come in actually what the costs are going to be. We can give you generalities, but nothing's even close to fine tuning it. And I'm afraid we're talking 6.5 to 7.5, 8.5, 9.5. We have no clue. And we'll get a better idea by March or April.
But this provision relates to what you can borrow, not so much what you can spend. So the data points would include what money, what grant funds and what funds you have available to devote to capital improvement. And also another data point would be what, if any, debt service do we have right now? I mean, if the town manager were to tell us that there was a $2 million debt that we're servicing right now, we would know we'd only be able to borrow $1 million more under this provision. You all may know that there is no debt, but probably want that on the record.
I see David. David, do you have public comment that you'd like to make?
Yeah, so in 1982, they set the credit limit for the town at 36,000, which was 1.5% of the annual budget. So just to give history, and then in the early 90s, it was changed to 1.5 million. And then in 2010, the town did borrow money. They did it for the Bayard loan so that there was a loan on the books for about like 10 or 12 years from 2010 on. And we had set it originally at 3.5. It came back from the committee, and I was with Gary at that time, and we set it to 3 million with the thought that the town hall we thought would only be a $5 million endeavor. But the town waited to build the town hall, so obviously construction costs have increased since then. The town should be very thankful of Ashley Hudson, who's now the Middlesborough Assistant Town Manager, because she got the town a $3 million grant in building a new town hall. But that said, going back to the original question, that we set the limit at 3 million at 2019, and today's dollars, that has gone up about 20%. So that money, that 3 million, you would really, to be equivalent, you would have to set it at 3.6 million. So I mean, I as a resident, I really believe 3.5 to 4 million would be a much better number than 3 million. The town already has 3 million. The town has a few million in savings. Sussex County is giving in some money. The state may give potentially some financing, low cost financing, and a number of, like, since they're building a town hall, 3.5 to 4 would be a good number. I just know in the discussion back in 2010, a lot of residents did not want the town borrowing more than 20% of the budget. And if the budget is 5 to 6 million, obviously that's like 1 to 2. So 3 million was considered back then in 2019 a high number. So 3.5 to 4 would probably be your target. But I hope this history has been helpful.
Has been.
Yes, thank you. So,
Can you wait till you have a better idea?
yeah, I think I'm going to suggest this, and I'll ask for the group, but it sounds to me like we should table this issue until the next meeting when we have a little more information from Bill, although I'm not sure, based on what Jim said, that we're going to have real specific numbers until the spring.
That seems
I'd be in
reasonable.
favor of that.
Is that it? So Jimmy, you're in favor of tabling? Marcia?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. All in favor?
I'm not necessarily in favor of it, because it seems like this is an issue that is one of the most pressing issues. But it doesn't, I mean, we don't need to solve this. The commissioners do in the town hall, and they need to be on top of it. And perhaps this is one of those situations where that's the message that we send. We're not creating legislation, but we're recommending they need to come up with that number, because it should be on their agenda every meeting.
But we can't do that until we're informed.
Right.
So it might be a better thing to do would be not to pass a motion at all, including a tabling motion. A tabling motion almost suggests that no action should take place until you have an opportunity to complete your evaluation of the question. And I think, as it was the case earlier with the item that you didn't come up with a recommendation on, perhaps this is something that you'll put on your next agenda, but you don't need to table it per se.
Okay. So any objection to accepting Fred's recommendation in terms of on this item?
Which is just no response, right?
No response. We're just gonna. We just discussed it, and we just discussed it, and we'll consider it for the next meeting. Okay.
And perhaps Jim, you would have Bill come with documents so we could consider it and we would know what we're talking about, and him telling us how much he's gonna need. And then we could send it back right away. We did it
We have a scheduled meeting with GMB this Thursday. to go over their 60% requirement under our contract for where they are with the design and build. And we'll try to get an update from them as to what they project costs to be. And Bill unfortunately had a medical appointment. That's why he's not here today. So I'll bring it up to Bill's attention and we'll try to get the figures that we can get at the next meeting.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
You're welcome.
Okay, with that, we're gonna move on to the agenda item number 2, which is discuss and possibly vote to recommend to the town commissioner amendments to chapter 71 of the town code regarding building permit requirements when repairs are needed to residential or commercial properties. I just want to do one quick check here, Fred. So Jimmy's got a firm hard stop at 5. Can we continue on with the 4 of us that we have online? Marcia, Elaine, Dan, and I, if we choose to make a vote on this, make a recommendation and a vote?
So what's the quorum requirement for this group?
There's 6 of us, right? 4.
So will you have 4?
Yes, we do.
And you're present, so at the central location, so.
Okay.
The,
All right.
the concern was the virtual meeting policy states there needs to be 2 at the anchor location.
Right.
So that's just that's a policy.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not the Freedom of Information Act requirement or state law.
No.
Mhm.
And this would just be discussion. There would be no voting.
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
That's fine. I think that's fine.
Oh, so you're saying we can go ahead if we choose to vote, we can, Fred?
I think you can. I think it's a policy. You recognize the policy exists, but I think you can proceed. Whereas you couldn't do that if it was code or state law that prohibited it.
Okay. All right. So with that, we'll at least go ahead and start the discussion on the topic. So I think the impetus behind this was Mr. Steve Spence came in last month and pointed out some discrepancies between Chapter 71, some of the issues in the county code, and what constitutes a repair versus a new construction. And did we want to allow or project some different costs based on the change of cost of living and labor and things like that? So that's what brought the topic to the table for today. Gary, is there anything you'd like to add? Gary, Commissioner Persinger put together some information I think would be helpful to go through, and then I want to turn to the town officials to get their input.
Yeah, there is a discussion I think that's important to have here with respect to meeting FEMA requirements. But what I had tried to do was put together some data that would hopefully bring a little more clarity to this in terms of if you were to just require or not require building permits for repairs, as was suggested, I think, in this meeting, or if you were to not require building permits for a certain cost of project level. And so I try to put some data together. 2 of the tables I believe are okay. The one, unfortunately, that talks about cost thresholds is not correct. Unfortunately, I forgot to apply the common sense test to the numbers that came out of the computer. And when I looked at them, they seriously failed the common sense test.
I thought it was me.
Reality.
So just for example, that, projects that cost less than $2,000, I think there were probably more like 68 of them. And, if projects less than $5,000, I think they're probably closer to 145 or so, something like that. But anyway, I think it's important to hear what Dawn has to say with respect to meeting FEMA requirements, because that is an essential thing that we have to meet in terms of any of this. Is Dawn available?
Yes, I am. Good evening.
Okay.
Evening.
So Dawn, we're going to turn to you and have you kind of brief us on your thoughts regarding these potential changes and how we need to comply with FEMA, and state regulations.
In looking at this, excuse me, what was brought up the other day by Mr. Spence had to do with 71-4 concerning an item D about a building permit shall not be required for normal maintenance requiring less than $1,000 of material costs. I believe that was one area that felt that needed to be changed monetary wise. So in looking at the code and analyzing it quite extensively today, it appears that there is, or could very well be, a difference between a building permit and what our Dewey Flood Code, which is section 101, requires. Section 101-12 states that permits are required. It does not state a building permit, but it talks about construction and other development that would be done within an area here in Dewey called the Special Flood Hazard Area. That's approximately at least 3/4 of the town, that where they have been designated by FEMA to be in this area where there's a 1% chance of flooding every year to a certain level at that location. And so our Dewey Code, which we've adopted, is patterned or based after the state of Delaware Senate Bill 64, where it does talk about permitting needed for filling, site improvements, construction, repairs, expansions of buildings, things of this nature. So it seems as if that there is a potential of not a conflict, but a different requirement potentially. Now, within our own flood code, it does talk about that there is a need for permitting for any sort of construction or other development. And of course, that is what is defined within our code about development has to do with any man-made change. But that if there is a conflict between our flood code and our other ordinances, the more restrictive shall govern. And that's found in 101-5. So it seems to be that there's a potential conflict with a building permit. No, I have to take that word back. Not a conflict, but perhaps a different viewpoint that permits are required within a special flood hazard area. FEMA has always required them. The town is the enforcement agency that FEMA states we've got to do the enforcement on their behalf. And so that's what our particular flood code does talk about. It does speak to new construction. It speaks to work on existing structures, what it needs to be done in determining if a substantial improvement has been or is being done on structures within a special flood hazard area. FEMA does address the fact that, and I'm trying to get out another document. It is located in FEMA publication 480, that there could possibly be a builder trying to avoid requirements by phasing the jobs, phasing the different building improvements and so forth. and applying for them at various times, so as to avoid this substantial improvement requirement of making the whole structure come up to FEMA flood codes. So FEMA looks down on that, does not approve of such a thing, yet that is something that we would need to talk with our town attorney in order to determine how or if repairs, additions, things of that nature can or cannot be done with the substantial improvement requirement. So without permit applications for whatever the work is being done, how do we know, how does the town know whether there's substantial improvement being done? In the prior ordinance, prior to the current floodplain code, it was instituted in 1993. The current flood code was instituted in 2014 and 15. So in the prior flood code, it did talk about minor repairs. It gave a definition for minor repairs. However, our current code doesn't have that. It does talk about minor repairs to existing buildings or structures, but it couldn't be any structural modifications and so forth. So comparing the old code with the current code, there have been some changes and so forth. And yes, FEMA has become much more restrictive. So has our current flood code become more restrictive, requiring these permits. It does talk about fines within the special flood hazard area, permits are not obtained. So it could very well be that it needs to be evaluated on the permits, what kinds of permits are needed, definitions for the term repair, normal maintenance. No, the Dewey Code, flood code, does not have a cumulative total or calculation toward this substantial improvement. Yet at the same time, it does still require repairs. So it could very well be that there needs to be additional definitions, additional understanding of for the kinds of permits. It could also be that there would be no necessary need for a permit that has a fee to it, but it is simply a permit of an audit trail of information to show that we can have, to show FEMA that we are following our flood code. It does require work, but at the same time, permits, according to our code that we've adopted, Section 101, permits are required, so are applications. But I think this is something that needs additional clarification and discussion with looking at what FEMA requires and what our code states that we have to abide by.
Okay. Thank you, Dawn. Jim, anything you want to add? Jim Dedes?
Well, I remember when we were involved in an audit back in 2014 under the community rating system. They wanted to look at all our records regarding what homes were built, what kind of substantial construction, how we determined all that. And it was about a 1.5 year process for us to get all of our records and find all those missing records that we didn't have at the time. And I remember a couple of incidents where we talked to our DENREC liaison with FEMA, and an issue came up with a home on Clayton Street that the owner wanted to do some renovations. And we got into the discussion about what is included what did they consider in FEMA as far as what should be included. Is painting is included? Is carpeting included? And their position was everything is included, with the exception of certain appliances. If you're replacing a stove or that. And we were kind of taken back, and and they stood by that. And we had to present to the owner that his appraisal of his house, which had to be a structure only, and what he wanted to do exceeded the 50%. And we were trying to figure out if you took out if you replace a cabinet, nope, that's included. Everything that they wanted to do was included basically in that. So they didn't leave much of a margin for us to say, you need a permit for everything. So we adopted that policy, at least in the FEMA things, and with their guidance that everything has to be included and requires a permit. And if you look at the permits now, I mean, since then we've been putting in the flood zone, with the flood area that they're in, including that. So it's a trail that we can monitor very easily with our computerized system. So what Dawn has presented basically, it says, yeah, there is a little bit of a conflict, because under the FEMA rules, we require absolutely everything to be included. And we may be a little bit more lax if you're in the X zone, which is the flood zone, but you're not really required to meet FEMA standards. So, and I know when Mr. Spence brought up his concerns about it and his suggestion that we adopt the county's policy, we're not so sure we're ready to adopt the county's policy as far as permitting. And if you adopted the county's policy completely, we would lose a tremendous amount of funding. And I say that because I look at, for example, a kitchen renovation, which is an extensive renovation. For some reason, they don't include it. And some of the kitchen renovations that we require permits for come up to, in one case, I saw one for over $100,000. So, I mean, that's $3,000 you lose, but it's cumulative over the number of renovations that we get. So we're a little guarded about losing revenue from the town's perspective. And we recently, the town commissioners, which was small potatoes, quite frankly, but it had to do with the tree ordinance and allowing people to do tree, removing shrubs and so forth like that. We don't charge any for that. But you're constantly taking away something from the town revenue. And we are a little concerned about how much we should take out. And right now, $1,000 is, to us, we don't include that. And if $2,000, and I looked at Gary, which you analyze, I mean, it's small potatoes really in the long run, but anything above that, I think we do take a concern because it is a budget issue for the town. That's all I have to say. Sorry, it took so long.
Thanks, Jim. That's perfect. That's what we need to hear. Anybody else have any more comments that they'd like to make from the committee?
I just have a question. I wait till
Okay.
Marcia go first.
I just wanted to make a comment that I really do think we need to address this. When we've got minor permits taking 1 to 2 weeks, replacement of a hot water heater, erection of a fence, painting, when those kind of things are taking 1 to 2 weeks, I think we either need more staff reviewing permits, or we need to train. It would seem to me there are certain permits that are very perfunctory. They're administrative. If you meet the requirement of putting a up to 7 foot privacy fence on your lot, and it is 18 feet back from the front property line, it's permitted. It's pretty black and white. It has to be 18 feet back and not exceed 7 feet. If you want to replace 2 windows, it's pretty black and white. It's permitted once you get over 2 windows. Painting should be pretty black and white. So I would say that, you know, we are now probably have had the longest delays in permitting in the last couple years that we have ever had, and are on the minor ones now exceeding Rehoboth, because there are just certain things that they don't need permits for, or it's an administrative staff function when it's a pretty rote permitting, you know, such as if you want a privacy fence, we could create a chart for minor rote permitting, which is privacy fences are permitted up to 7 feet. They must not be forward of your 18-foot front yard setback. And that's it. There's nothing else to look at. If a tree's in your footprint of your construction, it's pretty much, I don't even know why you have to go look at the tree. If it's shown in the middle of your construction site, the tree comes out. There's no argument about this. You know, you are allowed to remove anything which is in your construction site. Painting, if you want to paint, you get to paint. You just have to give the price and the contract. To me, these are things that one of our staff people should be looking at, and we should have a list, a criteria for what are the very basic single permits that should take less than 48 hours. I mean, there's not many qualifications at all on many types of things like this, where there's any kind of more than a basic review required. I think there's probably a list of a dozen things that are just could be removed from a very long line of large construction and larger renovation permits that are clogging up the building permitting process, to remove these half a dozen or a dozen things that are rote. They have very specific guidelines. If you meet them, you meet them. If you don't, you don't. And I really truly mean that. We've got a lot of new construction. I've been one of them. Trees are in the middle of your construction area. Nobody has to come look at them. There's no reason to come look at them. They are absolutely 100% permitted to be removed. And so I think things like that need to be, one way we could help the bottleneck is separate out that rote permitting items that can be an administrative detail with a single or double sheet guideline of, do you meet 1, 2, 3? And if you do, you get the permit, and it's issued by the front desk. And there could be a threshold where if there's a question, then it goes to a different process. But I think if we're going to continue at the $1,000 level, which is a it's a $50 permit, it probably takes more budget of Dawn or someone's hours at their annual salary to look at a $50 permit than it's worth the permitting price. And that's why I think some of those should just be removed, because I don't think it's just a matter of how much does the permit cost and how much are we losing in revenue? It's how much staff time are we taking to approve a $50 permit? My guess would be we're taking $100 to $200 in staff hours to approve a $50 permit, and we're losing permits on big construction projects that are going on and on and on that we can't get out the door. And quite frankly, we can't get some of these really minor ones out the door. So I think rather than frustrating our residents and our staff, we need some immediate addressing of these minor road permits.
Hey, Marcia, I want to just thank you. I hear your comments, and I just want to give everybody else a chance to talk. We've got some public comment.
No problem.
So, Elaine, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just had two questions for Jim and clarity, I guess. I thought what Spence was talking about and what the issue was is having to get permits for minor things, like for instance, a hot water heater that are keeping something up. And I thought that was what his issue was, and he wanted to deal with that. That's the one thing, and you can clarify that. And the second one, I wanted to ask Jim how the collections are doing. I know that you hired somebody to go around, but I know that these permits it's a funding issue. I mean, I think that we can pretend like it's not, but it is. So are we collecting everybody getting permits, or are 50% of the people getting permits and the other 50% of the people are not getting permits? How's the collection going?
I would say, and Dawn supervises John Tessitore, our code enforcement. We have done, well, he goes out and catches quite a few people. I mean, are people getting away with something? Certainly not to the level that it was before we had John. He issues stop work orders. We find that we have a lot of people that are doing work without business licenses, so they're required to stop work, get a business license. We have not been overly aggressive in issuing fines because a lot of these people are new to the area. They don't know that I guess they don't know that they need a business license, but we do get a hold of property owners, and we've caught quite a few people with doing construction, hiring people to do construction work and telling us they didn't know they had to get a permit. So John does catch a lot. I think we're way ahead of the ball game as far as people being caught coming in, getting getting permits. And that's one of the reasons you've seen a lot more permits coming in. I think we've hit 500 and some permit applications that we've processed this year, which is double than what we had last year.
Right.
So I think there's definitely a correlation of our code enforcement going out and catching people. And, Marcia brings up, I just want to comment, Marcia brings up a good point. We're very well caught up. We're on small stuff. We have nothing waiting that except for some small information that we require from property owners. The bigger items take more time to go through, and I think that's some of the frustration some of the contractors face in dealing with, getting zoning through, and that takes more time, and that takes a lot of Dawn's time. My time is devoted really to helping Dawn out in collecting the stuff that don't require major involvement in construction and zoning requirements. Marcia, I do want to bring up one thing you brought up on fences. There is a reason why we want a survey done, because we've caught people building fences on other people's property. So that's why we would like to have a permit and and some sort of a survey so we can look at your ideas. And we've talked about seeing if we could administratively can shift some small stuff out so we can spend more time.
Mm-hmm. And I think the survey is a good point. I do think there are a dozen or less things that we could shift administratively.
And we do want to point out, people that have issues with HVAC, if it's an emergency, we've already told the contractors, go do it, and we'll deal with it after the fact. And that's a standard that we use for everybody. So, we've really tried to improve it even with our contractors.
All right. Dan,
Dave,
yes.
Dave, this is Dawn.
Go ahead, Dawn.
Concerning emergency repairs, the town has adopted within our code the 2021 IRC IBC building code. That's what the county's on. And so section R 105.2.1 speaks to emergency repairs. And so this is what we do follow, that emergency repairs can be performed for getting that emergency taken care of. But it is also an honor system that is required by the contractor or the person responsible to submit an application within the next working business day for that permit. So this is what we try to follow. And we want emergency repairs to be taken care of immediately. We're not here to cause a safety issue, but it's a twofold process of having others, the contractors, to follow through as well.
Thank you, Dawn. Hey, David, I see you're on. I just want to give Dan Malley just a chance to chime in here, and then I'm going to come to you, David.
I'm
Dan,
good, Dave.
You're good? Okay. David, would you like to comment?
Yeah, just the original discussion got a little twisted with FEMA, and FEMA has their own on their own website. Building permits are based on local codes and ordinance that are enforced locally, not by FEMA. And we're talking about minor changes, repairs, or remodeling projects. What's considered an emergency, a water heater can be out for a resident for a week. And in fact, it's funny, the plumber was telling me a story how the town hall actually had a plumbing issue where their water was shut off, and they didn't want the plumber to fix it till there was a permit. And he said it was a 5-minute job. And all we're asking for as residents is the limit has not been raised in many years. The town used to get 300,000 in building permits back in 2018. Now they're getting about 500,000. So they're making a lot more money. And if you look at it, if you just raise that limit from 1,000 to 3,000, keeping all the other rules in place, it keeps it simple. Or even like 2,500, it's not a huge impact to the town. We're talking about like $5,000, but it makes it much simpler because before COVID, Dawn and Jim were not getting water heater applications. The water heater used to cost about like $1,200, $800, $600. The price of water heaters in all building constructions have gone up substantially.
Yeah,
so if you just
true.
set the limit at 2,500 or 3,000 to go with the inflation, because everything the town's asking for a higher credit limit, employees ask for higher salary. If you go back to when that $1,000 was set, and it's also a $50 minimum, so it's Bill Mayers used to say if it's below 1,500, he didn't enforce it. If you go back to that limit and adjust for inflation, you're going to get that 2,500 to 3,000 number, and it would alleviate a lot of issues. The town has told and then there's a flip side of what Marsha said. I'll leave it at that. The town had told the plumbers and all contractors for every job, no matter the amount, you need to come to us. So now you have a little small contractor that has a huge paper burden. So it's not just the town that has the burden, it's the contractor. So certain plumbers will not deal in Dewey anymore because of this. So that's why you're trying to make things so that residents can actually get services they need. Even if it goes up to 2,000 and it's not as much as 2,500, it just alleviates some of the pressure. But I would love if it would just go up to what a water heater costs. That's because there's no reason my family, including my 4-year-old daughter, should go without a hot water heater and hot water for a week. And what Jim and Dawn consider emergency is a 4-year-old doesn't need a hot, warm water bath.
So David, let me just ask a clarifying question. Are you saying that no permit should be required if the work is less than $5,000? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, 25,000 to 3,000. I think 5,000 would actually be too much because the town does have a fiscal budget.
2,500, you mean?
So $2,500, you're suggesting $2,500 for both material and services. Is that right?
Yeah, 2,500 to 3,000 would probably be a sweet spot.
And I would have to weigh in that I would be in favor of 3,000. I think everything has doubled in price. You know, I got an estimate the other day, as wild as it was to install a new faucet in the kitchen, $780. So that was a $300 item 4 years ago. And I think when we go up to 3,000, we're talking about a $60 permit. You know, we have a minimum of $50 permit. So we're talking a differentiation of $10. And I think if we're going to raise it, let's just be reasonable and try to help on both sides, eliminate some issues with staffing and all these permits for maintenance, for true maintenance items. And, you know, let's not just go little baby steps. We haven't raised it in a long time. Building materials and labor is almost doubled. I think $3,000 that would be my suggestion as a very reasonable threshold.
Okay. So,
I have
Elaine?
one comment. Can I
ahead,
make
David.
one quick comment to you? And we need to separate what is required in a non-FEMA zone and what is required in a FEMA zone. So those little permits, 2,000 or 3,000, are, I believe, are going to be required in a FEMA zone.
Well,
If
I
we're-
think if, you know, you've got the X zone and the entire north end that aren't in FEMA zone, so that's
Right,
pretty
right.
much half the town. That would be a huge help in terms of eliminating permits. I mean,
I'm
if you're in
just
a
saying-
FEMA zone, you're in it.
Right.
So,
You have to
I'm
get
just
one.
saying that,
so,
that's
yeah.
something to consider.
Yeah, so let me see if I can kind of summarize, because I've heard, I'm trying to get to some consensus here, and that is anything that's in a FEMA zone requires a permit without fail. I mean, that's the law, that's a requirement. So if it's in a FEMA zone, you do. If you're in a non-FEMA zone, we're suggesting that we raise the limit to $3,000 before you have to apply for a permit. Is that what I'm hearing? Everybody agree on that?
That's
It
what I'm
seems
hearing. I don't know if
like
I
a
agree.
reasonable maintenance amount for most maintenance type things. I mean, you're not renovating a bathroom or a kitchen on $3,000,
No, that's true.
and you're not even refinishing a floor for $3,000.
Okay.
Ah,
So, well,
ah.
Jim or Dawn, does that sound like something we could put forward to the commissioners for their consideration?
So
Does that sound like something you
if I could jump in,
Sure, Fred.
so the exception from the building permit requirement is referring to normal maintenance. And that the exception applies to projects that include materials of $1,000 or less. So it doesn't include labor. So it's just materials. So that would allow you, that does allow you to perform a more expensive normal maintenance or maintain something that might cost more than $1,000 if any component of that is devoted to labor. So again, I'm just telling you how the code currently reads. The FEMA language doesn't refer to maintenance anywhere, as far as I can tell. Doesn't say anything about maintenance. It refers to repairs, however, without limitation. So some of what we've been talking about constitutes repairs, and some of it is normal maintenance. Neither of the terms are really well defined. I think it's probably a bigger project to try and do that. But normal maintenance does not seem to be an item that's listed under the permit required section for FOIA, as I read it.
FOIA or FEMA?
I'm sorry, FEMA, thank you. It refers to remodeling, but that's not normal maintenance, I don't think. It refers to replacement. I don't know if that's normal maintenance. I mean, it seems to me that we've got to work on the definition a little bit. And you could raise that limit significantly, but if you're doing something other than normal maintenance, then I suppose you're still required to get a permit under 71-4C, which says all construction, repairs, and alterations require permits.
Under our code, right, Fred?
Under your existing code. The exception is in 71-4D for normal maintenance. The permit requirement is 71-4C, which includes all repairs, alterations, and additions. So it's a little complicated.
But I mean, it comes down to you. It depends on what the definition of maintenance is. I mean, some I'd say replacing their HVAC system is essentially maintenance because it's beginning to fail. It's requiring a lot of service. And so replacing it is really maintenance. But under the FEMA definition, you said replacement is covered and requires a permit. So, you know, for us to put replacement of an HVAC system under maintenance would be a bit difficult. Even replacement You
In
know,
that
that's
case,
probably
though,
a better-
that HVAC system would be more than $1,000, so it
Well,
wouldn't
but
be.
a heating water heater might not be, perhaps.
Mhm.
Might be able to get a water heater for less than $1,000. And you know, but that again, it's replacement. But even though you would consider, and it would be prudent to replace a water heater that's 10 years old, and you would think of that as maintenance. So I mean, we would really have to define that fairly specifically. So I mean, we've got several issues running around here. When are permits really required? Does FEMA really have a specific requirement that requires permits even for the smallest job? Even let's say for a replacement, I think for replacement of an HVAC system, there are some FEMA requirements on where it goes, I presume, you know, if you're in a floodplain. But I think we need a better analysis of what current FEMA requirements are, match those up against the current requirements in our code, and see whether or not we can begin to reasonably create the kind of exceptions based on the total cost of a project or total cost of materials, if we want to stick with that. See how that fits together with FEMA and how we would have to change our code to be able to do that. So it's there's work to be done here, it sounds to me.
Yeah, Jerry, and I agree that it's a great idea to do that. I also would ask that any changes that would be considered by the town council, that we look at the possible loss of revenue based upon permits that were issued.
Right.
Okay.
And that's what I was trying to do with my analysis before I applied the common sense test to what I came up with.
So,
Yeah.
You know, but in terms of a $3,000 project limit, I think there probably are about 100 applications that or permits that have been issued for projects of that size. I can't tell you exactly how much revenue that would be, but it's probably, you know, in the 20,000 or more range is my guess.
so
You get an email from David Thomas, Gary.
Yeah, that's
Which,
additional background, yes.
yeah, and I think one of the things, and I want to throw this out to the people who've been talking about this, because it makes sense to me too, if you do raise, once you do the finding out whether or not maintenance or, you know, the whole FEMA issues, but, and if you're going to raise it to 3,500, we find out that that's not going to have an impact on, you know, the Jim Didi's losing his job. We don't want that to happen. We're getting a bonus, Jim.
Please,
And-
please do.
But
would be good.
he says, and I think this makes sense, and is that it should be for the whole job, not just the materials. I think that gets very confusing, and I think it was a really good point. And perhaps that actually, if it is for the whole job, that may help with 3,500, you know, for the whole job, and then we won't have as much revenue taken away because of the fact it's for the whole job, just not the materials. Because right here, it has the job, not the cost of the materials used for the job, the way it is now.
Right.
And I think, Elaine, another comment on that, the cost of the labor is highly variable because you have workers that are working as a handyman for $25 an hour. You have workers that are working as a handyman for $75 an hour, and you have $100 an hour. So one person could do the same job for 100% more in labor or not. So I think keeping the labor cost out is a good thing. Otherwise, it is too variable. And I feel like, you know, looking at this as something we get accomplished or move forward on, even if in this meeting we say, let's raise it to 2,000 just based on COVID, everything has gone up 30 to 50%. We haven't raised it in a long time. Let's just get something done to get it to a more reasonable rate of what materials are costing. And the fact that we know that materials have gone wildly out of control in terms of increases in costs, it seems reasonable to say, what if we just say, raise it from 1,000 to 2,000 in material costs and continue the discussion and refine some of these definitions on what actually is maintenance, such as Commissioner Persinger, you know, when you said like, we're gonna change our countertop. You know, the granite's worn out. This is maintenance. I think it's very specific. I think we can come up with a very specific, it's not gonna be a perfect list, but I think we can do a lot better. And I think if we could just get it to 2,000, recognizing the increases over the past 4 years, we at least give people more leeway, more what's realistic right now for what prices are. I would say 3 is a great number, but I feel like if we just get it up to $1,000 to do maintenance on material costs is barely anything anymore with how things have, you know, gone up. And then I think we should look at working on what is the definition of maintenance and what really, you know, doesn't require, you know, a permit. Like as an example, in Rehoboth, if you change your countertop, you're required to get a permit. That is, in my opinion, ridiculous.
So let me stop us there for a minute. Is there, I agree with everyone else. I think, you know, a better definition, compliance with FEMA, making sure we have a steady process. I think in some cases, we're not going to be able to get away with not having a permit, especially if we've got a FEMA requirement. So I think we can all agree that that needs further discussion. What I'm going to ask from the committee is there a motion to make a recommendation to change the amount of a permit, material costs on a permit to $2,500? Is there a motion?
I would be happy making that motion.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to take a vote. Let's just go around and do a quick vote. So I'm going to say, Marcia, yay or nay?
Yay.
Dan?
Yay.
Okay. Elaine?
I just wish we knew how much, I wish that calculation Gary did was provided. I just wish we knew how much money they actually raised with these permits and how it's
Yeah.
going to impact the budget.
We don't really know material costs anyway. I'm not sure if that can be separated out of any of the building permit applications. All we have are the total costs.
Right. We don't have it. So, and you know, it's just a recommendation, Elaine. We're not, all we're doing is make a recommendation to the commissioners. They'll either accept it, reject it, or ask or defer it.
I'm okay with it going up, even if it went up to 3,500, as David Moskowitz talked about. I just wish that we would just like leave it to recommend, perhaps bringing it up because of the cost of living, and they look at that number and they come up with the number with the work of the town manager.
Right.
Because I think there is a collective that Spence, when he spoke, I've heard from many people that they agreed with him about the $1,000 and having to pay for those
Right.
permits. So
I agree with you, and I think, you know, just as a starting point, the $2,500 is acceptable to me. So that would make it unanimous that we make that recommendation for the commissioners to at least increase the cost of materials in the permit process. And then,
or more.
Okay.
yeah, we can make 2,500 or more. I mean, we'll say 2,500. The commissioners will make it what they want. And then we will I'll take as an action item, maybe work with Jim and Dawn on getting some more definitions and some more data for more discussion next time.
Mhm.
Okay?
Also, Dave, I'm sorry, but I've got to drop off. I have somewhere I need to be at 6. 5:40.
Yeah, geez.
Yeah. So we can, Alice, the only thing left on the agenda for tonight is to review other suggestions for other charter changes. So we can defer that, or we can go ahead and have and I'm going to suggest maybe we defer it, because if Elaine, you're not here, Jimmy's not here, that leaves just the three of us. So Commissioner Persinger, if you don't have any objections, I think we should just defer those to the next
No,
meeting.
Yeah, when Marcia leaves, you won't have a quorum, so I think you really need to end the meeting.
Okay. All right. So that will conclude what we've covered off, what we can cover in tonight's agenda. So can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. And a second?
I second Elaine.
Thank you, Elaine. All right, all in favor?
Right.
All right. So
Okay,
that's-
thank you, everybody.
All right, with that said,
Okay.
we'll close the meeting.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Yes, it did.
Oh, we didn't do the next meeting. Ah, darn it.